Lockdowns only reduced COVID-19 mortality by 0.2%. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee because I want to talk about this latest research, which is out from Johns Hopkins, looking at the effect of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality. Only 0.2% reduction. Now, I know there'll be some people that advocate for every life being infinitely valuable. We need to look at these things, sadly, through a society that has limited resources, everyone. Now, the damage caused by this reduction in mortality needs to be, assessed, and we need to rationally think of if it was worth it. So, this has been reported by Yahoo. Lockdowns only reduced COVID-19 mortality by 0.2%, study finds. Should be rejected out of hand with regard to lockdowns. German media is going all over it as well. Lockdowns haben fast keine Corona-Todesfallen verhindert. And other media are reporting this as well. John Hopkins research. Lockdowns did little to help. From The Edge in Malaysia. Study says COVID-19 lockdowns in the US and Europe have had little to no public health impact. So, as we go through this topic today, I want you to make sure you watch right to the end so we can look at strategies to stop lockdowns from returning, at least here in Australia. Okay, so stay to the end. I don't want to just be harping on the problems here. We want to look at solutions. So, the study. This is a literature review and meta-analysis of the effects of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality. The authors are Jonas Herby, Lars Jungen, and Steve H. Hank, published in the Studies in Applied Economics in January this year. So this is a recent publication. Before we have a look at this and some other things, I want to, draw your attention to what a literature review actually is. And I got this from Wiki for everyone. It's been some time since I've had to do a literature review, but everyone who's done a thesis or dissertation at university will, or even at high school, you would generally have to do a literature review. So it's an overview of the previously published works on a specific topic, and it can refer to a full scholarly paper or section of a scholarly work such as a book or an article. To be precise, a literature review serves to situate the current study within the body of relevant literature and to provide context for the reader. This is one of the things when we were doing our undergrad thesis. We had to identify a gap in the body of knowledge that we could address, and by doing that, the first step was to do a literature review. I did mine on looking at applying animation techniques to generate architectural forms, where Rachel did her thesis looking at the implications of legislation on the design of buildings from a fire safety perspective. And that's a lot of reading. Okay, so this study is part literature review, but it's also part meta-analysis. Now, a meta-analysis is a statistical analysis that combines the results of multiple scientific studies. Meta-analysis can be performed when there are multiple scientific studies addressing the same question, with each individual study reporting measurements that are expected to have the same degree of error. So there's a lot of criteria to how you can actually do a meta-analysis, what research you can do it on. It needs to be similar enough so you can combine the research or compare the research. You need to account for biases in the research. You need to make sure the research is actually legitimate and real. And so meta-analysis you'll see done quite often, and you got to be, they're only as good as the information that goes into them. And this is one website that everyone is loving, the ivermectin real-time meta-analysis, but this is a terrible meta-analysis. A few issues here are, some of the research that they're referring to, or the papers, is been proven to never have occurred. It's anonymous. You don't know who the people are that are publishing this, guys. So it's completely useless. In academic work, there needs to be the ability for rigorous debate. And also, guys, there's no account for bias in this research, in the meta-analysis there on that website. So you've got to account for these things. And Johns Hopkins are a reputable organization, everyone. Okay, so who are the authors? We've got Jonas Herby is a special, hang on, and I'll just get my highlighter going here because I like it, is a special advisor at the Center for Political Studies in Copenhagen, Denmark. His research focuses on law and economics. He holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Copenhagen. Lars Jonung is Professor Emeritus in Economics at Lund University, Sweden. He serves as chairperson of the Swedish Fiscal Policy Council from 2012 to 2013, as research advisor at the European Commission 2000 and 2010, and as chief economic advisor to the Prime Minister Carl Bildt in 92-94. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of California in Los Angeles. And Steve H. Hank is a professor of applied economics and founder and director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Applied Economics, Global Health, and the Study of Business Enterprise. He is a senior fellow and director of the Troubled Currencies Project at the Cato Institute, a contributor at National Review, a well-known currency reformer, and a currency and commodity trader. Professor Hawke served on President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors, has been an advisor to 5 foreign heads of state and 5 foreign cabinet ministers, and held a cabinet-level rank in both Lithuania and Montenegro. He's been awarded 7 honorary doctorate degrees and is an honorary professor at 4 foreign institutes. He was president of Toronto Trust Argentina in Buenos Aires in 1995, and when it was the world's best-performing mutual fund. Currently, he serves as chairman of the Supervisory Board of Advanced Metallurgical Group, NV, in Amsterdam. In 1998, he was named one of the 25 most influential people in the world by World Trade magazine. In 2020, Professor Hank was named a Knight of the Order of the Flag. So you can see here there's no anonymity here. These are reputable people with careers that they want to defend. So let's have a look at the abstract from this study, everyone. So this systematic review and meta-analysis are designed to determine whether there is empirical evidence to support the belief that lockdowns reduced COVID-19 mortality. Because you'll start to hear that, and we'll see it from our very own politicians. Sure, there was a cost associated with this. Sure, there was an impact, but the alternative could have been worse. That's the real question. Let us know in the comments chat if you're seeing this, if you're hearing it and people saying, lockdowns were tough, but it could have been worse. And it's usually from people who weren't actually economically impacted at all. Lockdowns are defined as the imposition of at least one compulsory non-pharmaceutical intervention, NPI. NPIs are any government mandate that directly restrict people's possibilities, such as policies that limit internal movements, close schools and businesses, ban international travel. This study employed a systematic search and screening procedure in which 18,590 studies are identified that could potentially address the belief posed. After 3 levels of screening, 34 studies ultimately qualified. So look at that. They went from over 18,000 studies down to 34. So it's a rigorous process to screen these studies. Of those 34 eligible studies, 24 qualified for inclusion in the meta-analysis. Now, this is what needs to be done. This is a very rigorous process, everyone. And we can quite clearly contrast the level of work, screening, and effort that's been done into this meta-analysis to the example that's put forward by the ivermectin website. And this is why professionals are arguing that that's not actually a meta-analysis, what they're doing there. And this is probably giving you some insight. So you've got to be wary about some of the stuff that's put out there, guys. A lot of it you need to be very skeptical about. So let's have a look at this. Let's keep going. So they were separated into 3 groups: lockdown stringency index studies, shelter-in-place orders studies, and specific NPI studies. An analysis of each of these 3 groups support the conclusion that lockdowns have had little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality. More specifically, stringency index studies find that lockdowns in Europe and the United States only reduced COVID mortality by 0.2% on average. SIPOs were also ineffective, only reducing COVID mortality by 2.9% on average. Specific NPI studies also find no broad-based evidence of noticeable effects on COVID-19 mortality. What this tells me, it just adds additional evidence to the argument I have that our bureaucrats and politicians are making it up as they go along, everyone. So, while this meta-analysis concludes that lockdowns have had little or no public health effects, they have imposed enormous economic and social costs where they've been adopted. In consequence, lockdown policies are ill-founded and should be rejected as a pandemic policy instrument. Now, that's quite a clear statement that they're making with a lot of political significance because so many people have tied their hats down to lockdowns. I would argue it has a political purpose more than a medical or health purpose. I'd say it even wins votes. That people are crying out to their politicians to lock them down and to restrict their freedoms. I think some people were taken aback by how many Australians were happy for that to happen, how many were calling for it. This is why this type of research needs to be widely shared and people need to understand and be made aware of it and to appreciate the rigor that goes into it so it's not simply dismissed. Now, I will link to that entire paper if you want to go through it on your own, but I thought we'd talk about a few other things because there's precedent to this. Back in March of last year, we were already talking about lockdowns not playing a dominant role in reducing transmissions. Stay-at-home policy is a case of exception fallacy, an internet-based ecological study. Now, you can find this video where I go through it on my Odyssey channel, everyone. Check it out there. But that's why none of this is at all surprising me, this research that's coming out. And then there is another precedent that I went through some time ago. This was disease mitigation measures in the control of pandemic influenza. Now, one of the authors here is D.A. Henderson, Donald Henderson. Now, he was an American medical doctor, an epidemiologist who directed a 10-year international effort that eradicated smallpox throughout the world and launched international childhood vaccination programs. From 77 to 90, he was the dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and sadly he just passed away in August 2016. But we need to listen to someone with this experience. How many people have managed to eradicate an illness, everyone? So let's have a look at the abstract here. And I'll want to draw, remember, this is written in 2006. And then I want to pull out a few things here that I think are very relevant. This is old, this is old papers that were put out there, old discussions that were put forward about some of these interventions that we're doing now. This makes me think that they are really making it all up as they're going along. The threat of an influenza pandemic has alarmed countries around the globe and given rise to an intense interest in disease mitigation measures. This article reviews what is known about the effectiveness and practical feasibility of a range of actions that might be taken in attempts to lessen the number of cases and deaths resulting from an influenza pandemic. This article also discusses potential adverse second and third order effects of mitigation actions that decision makers must take into account. Okay, now this is what's important here. And I know COVID-19 is not influenza. Anyone who thinks that it is, you're kidding yourself, guys. It's much worse. Okay? It is. Finally, the article summarizes the author's judgments of the likely effectiveness and likely adverse consequences of the range of disease mitigation measures and suggests the priorities and practical actions to be taken. So this is quite a good paper that was put out there, and it really doesn't seem to be getting much attention at all in the public discourse. Now here, social, economic, and political assessment. What are the possible unintended adverse social consequences? Okay, so disease mitigation measures, however well intended, have potential social, economic, and political consequences that need to be fully considered by political leaders as well as health officials. Now, Is it just me, or does it seem like this hasn't occurred? Have we seen any economic assessment of these lockdown policies that have been implemented again and again? Where's the cost-benefit analysis that's been put out there? Tony Abbott's the only one calling for these type of things in public. Maybe we need more people to. Maybe this needs to... I know it sounds a bit macabre, but we need to look at the actual implications of these drastic interventions. If destroying people's businesses, lives, destroying children's futures, causing unknown psychological damage to their potential development, let alone just all the increase in mental health issues, is that worth a 0.2% mitigation to mortality? Is closing schools is an example. Some have suggested closure might be recommended for as long as the pandemic persists in a single community, perhaps 8 weeks. That's funny. How many people have had to do distance schooling now? Remember, this was written in 2006. The rationale for the strategy is to diminish contact between students and so to retard the epidemic spread. However, if this strategy were to be successful, other sites where school children gather would also have to be closed. Daycare centers, cinemas, churches, fast food stores, malls, and athletic arenas. We didn't quite get all of them. They closed the churches. They kept the brothels open. Fast food stores were open still. Many parents would need to stay at home from work to care for children, which could result in high rates of absenteeism that could stress critical services, including healthcare. Well, see, that's why they left the daycare open for the essential workers, everyone. School closures also raise the question of whether certain segments of society would be forced to bear an unfair share of the disease control burden. A significant proportion of children in low-income families rely on school feeding programs for basic nutrition. That's terrifying. That is really terrifying. Right now, Rachel is getting quite frustrated at the amount of, dietary... The problem is the Australian government dietary guidelines are garbage, and they're just being presented on our school curriculum as gospel. But, there you go. Large-scale quarantine measures. There are no historical observations or scientific studies that support the confinement by quarantine of groups of possibly infected people for extended periods in order to slow the spread of influenza. Now, this is just influenza. It could be different for COVID. A World Health Organization writing group, after reviewing the literature and considering contemporary international experience, concluded that forced isolation and quarantine are ineffective and impractical. Despite this recommendation by experts, mandatory large-scale quarantine continues to be considered as an option by some authorities and government officials. Home quarantine. Voluntary, wouldn't that be nice? Voluntary home quarantine would be requested of individuals who are asymptomatic but who have had substantial contact with a person who has influenza, primarily household members. The aim of voluntary home quarantine is to keep possible contagion but still asymptomatic people out of circulation. This sounds logical, but this measure raises significant practical and ethical issues. If implemented on a community-wide scale, logistical requirements related to ensuring that quarantine households across a community had appropriate care and support would be necessary. Seems to be falling apart with our in-home hospital care at the moment, doesn't it? How compliant the public might be is uncertain. Well, we've seen that. Parents would presumably be willing to stay at home and care for sick children, but it is not known, for example, whether college students would agree to be interned with infected dorm mates. And here, the overriding principle from this, what they've written here from this paper. An overriding principle: experience has shown that communities faced with epidemics or other adverse events respond best with the least anxiety when the normal social functioning of the community is least disrupted. Strong political and public health leadership to provide reassurance and to ensure that needed medical care services are provided are critical elements. If either is seen to be less than optimal, a manageable epidemic could move towards catastrophe. Okay, and this was reviewed in disease mitigation measures. We went through the entire paper, and this is some of the intervention measures that they were critical of, these epidemiological experts and people that have succeeded in eradicating illnesses that have scourged humanity for thousands of years, but which they implemented. and now which recent literature reviews and meta-analysis is continuing to show have had, well, very insignificant impacts on mortality. So, remember, this is all about the government coming to our rescue, guys. You know, the government intervention that saved us all. How much did it cost? And here I've just grabbed some old articles. $17 billion and counting, $20 billion and counting. But what we really should be looking at, everyone, the cost of these lockdowns, is this number here. This is the government debt. I mean, what are we looking at here? $1.4 trillion and rising. And we can see here this growth shooting right up, guys. There you go. There you go. At state and national levels. Now, remember, government debt, I don't care what MMTers say, we're going to be forced to pay it one way or another. We're going to have to work it. And they'll just introduce more taxes and more interventions in our lives to keep it going. It's just something to keep in mind when people advocate for this, everyone. Because remember what they did. Let's have a bit of a refresher. They kept zombie companies alive. Remember the trading while insolvent provisions, guys? Remember that? 5,000 insolvencies are expected. I need to update this chart to see where it's going. Nearly 9% of the Victorian workforce was on JobKeeper. Everyone. Okay? That's huge. That's really big. You know, this is showing you the number of people, applicants on JobKeeper. And I don't blame you for taking it. If you needed it, go ahead. Even if you didn't need it and you can get it, I don't blame you for taking it. It's free money. Well, it's not really free money. It's probably a refund of your taxes that you've been paying. But this is all part of the cost that was associated with this, everyone. You've got, you know, percentage of employed people, nearly 9% in Victoria, 7.95% in New South Wales, nearly 7% in Queensland. They're juicing the market, the housing market. That's the government's favourite intervention strategy. We've got the cash rate, which still hasn't been increased. You know, 3% used to be considered an emergency level. You've had the home builder grants, first home buyer grants, 5 and 2% government loan guarantees. Now, the concern is, the real concern is here, with interest rates going up, and I will do another video about interest rates going up again, if the people at the 5 and 2% level are going to get in trouble because they've overextended themselves. Now, hopefully they've not, because the challenge of getting a deposit to get into a house is probably a lot worse than, you know, having to scrape up another $500 a month. It's going to be tough, but I think some people, more people than we realize, will actually be able to achieve it. You've got negative gearing continually driving investment and innovation into housing and not into other parts of the economy. I would argue that's decreasing our economic complexity, everyone. Why bother starting up a business? Why bother innovating when you just put it into housing? It's frustrating when you're a small business owner and you realize you've made more money in a year on your house doing absolutely nothing than a year running a business with all the stress. Then remember the super withdrawals, everyone. Now I know you get all the people in the super industry who are complaining about it, that they're going to spend it on boob jobs and gamble it away. Most people use it to pay down debt. So, and I mean, here we go, negative gearing. Everyone's using it, guys. It's across the board here in Australia. Now, the viewer poll aspect of this video, with that in mind, with the government coming to the rescue, with the cost that's associated with it, with the precedent that we've had of epidemiologists warning about these interventions, with the research coming out now that these lockdowns didn't really work, I asked viewers the question, did you enjoy the lockdowns? And this is from some time ago. 22% said yes. 22% of people said yes, 78% said no. And the interesting thing is, by saying yes, well, you've got to think about it. For some people, this may have been the first holiday they've had in forever. This may be the first time they've actually got to spend with their children, the first time they've gotten off the treadmill. So I can understand how some people could enjoy it, could enjoy the break. They're probably living a life that some of us have been enjoying for some time. I've been working at home for years now, and I definitely prefer it than going to the office. It has its advantages. And seeing the kids, even when they annoy you. And break your stein, everyone. That's why I'm on this one. So, let's have a look at the viewer breakdown here. Majority of you are Australian viewers. We've got some Kiwis US viewers, British and Canadian. I think a lot of those in Southeast Asia and India could also be expats, or people coming and going to Australia, or people that are just interested, but the majority are Australians. The gender breakdown is 12% female and 87.9, 88% roughly male. And you can see here the spreads. And if we look at, most of you are millennials with some boomers, zoomers, boomers, Gen Xers, and a few zoomers, guys. So this is the poll. We had 3,553 results, 114 likes. It was done 5 months ago, 320 comments. Now, I've selected just a few comments here just to discuss. We won't go through all of them today. So, this is from Floyd. If people want to, of their own choice, want to lock themselves down, good, then leave the rest of us alone to move about as we want. Now, the problem is, that's not how it works in this country. Individual liberty really isn't appreciated that much here in Australia. We really are a big nanny state. More than some people realize. We're not America. And here from Free Thought. I can't really weigh in on this because so far, touch wood, I haven't been in a lockdown other than the initial full lockdown. And we went to Bunnings the other day and Kmart and Target. But I don't really go out to that many places anyway. I just don't want to be told I can't go out. So Free Thought was more concerned with just being told about not going out, the loss of that freedom. So, Gendera, less traffic on the road is good. Don't enjoy the hubby not being able to go to work. I mean, that is an advantage if you have to drive around, but it affects your ability to work and employment, everyone. And Lena, whether one enjoys lockdowns or not shouldn't influence their capacity to see the bigger picture. The aftermath of the loss of livelihoods, depression, anxiety, and traumatization of our children will be with us far longer than our individual lockdown experiences. Now, my daughter, who's turning 9 very soon, has asked, well, did you have a big disease or a pandemic when you were young? Did you have lockdowns when you were young? Were you forced to wear masks when you were a kid? And the closest I can say was we had the AIDS pandemic, and the advertisements terrified me as a kid, but we didn't have these insane interventions as we do now. Different illnesses. And then Maximus. Yes, there is time to unwind or get little jobs done and such, but each time I get more nervous about my industry and the future of the country. So Maximus sees some of the benefits of the lockdowns for people. And like I said, there's some people that are going to make the best of a worse situation. I had a friend who had to self-isolate because he had COVID. And, it was a week off for him at home playing computer games and relaxing. But he couldn't drink because it was too sick. But still, that's a good view framing. It's how you need to frame your life. Look at the benefits to everything, but be aware of the long-term implications. So with that in mind, let's look at some strategies to stop lockdowns from returning. We need to make it harder for the bureaucrats to just make this up as they go along. So, first one is to share the facts and evidence with your family and friends, everyone. Show them what the latest research is. Don't be a nut job, everyone. Fact check things when you see them. Make sure it's from reputable sources, from reputable people. Vote strategically for political parties that oppose lockdowns and restrictions. Okay, maybe you don't need to. We've got an election coming this year. You don't need to agree with everything some of these parties stand for. If the lockdowns are a major issue that's affected you and your livelihood, you need to vote strategically. You need to get these people in the Senate. You need to get a significant vote for them in the House of Representatives. Very least, you'll get some people there to make some noise, and some of the bigger parties may steal the policies of some of the little parties. I would be utterly shocked. Some people seem to think Clive Palmer is going to bring it in, and you'll have, what is it, UAP running the country. I don't think it's going to happen, guys, not in one election cycle, but you could get a few senators in there and a few people in the House of Reps. You've also got the Libertarians with Campbell Newman. You've got One Nation as well. My only concern is that all these people that are opposing lockdowns are going to, damage the votes. So you're going to have to make sure you learn how to use your preferences. And let me know if there are others. There'll be lots of parties and people out there. Don't be afraid to use your preferences and vote strategically. Remember, none of them are going to be your favorite. You're not going to love all of their policies. They're going to disappoint you one way or another. That's just politics. But you want to send a clear message that we don't want this happening anymore. I would advocate for a reduction in the size of government and their power. I think long term that should be the aim. We need to decrease the size of government. We need to decrease the dependency that people have on government systems and procedures, and advocate for individual responsibility, because then that's the only way we can get a long-term change here. If people are too dependent on the state, they're going to continue voting for that dependency. There needs to be a cultural shift. This isn't going to happen in one election. This is going to be a generational issue. I'd encourage people to become politically active. People are protesting for the first time in their lives. The first time they have got off their ass, got out there and got involved. That's really good to see. You need to encourage people to do that. But also you need to realize that it's a slow march through the institution, so don't be disheartened if it's a bit of a mission and a bit of a slug, and if you have upsets along the way. But there could be a silver lining to all of this. It could be a new awakening of Australians taking an interest in politics for the first time in their lives. So maybe we can get some politicians in there that can address the real issue, which is the bureaucracy, which needs to be reduced, and we need to clean out a lot of the people in those organizations. They're the real ones that have a lot of the power, everyone, not the politicians. So these are some of the references that we referred to in this video, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll link to these on the blog. Now, the upcoming next video that I am working on, this is about the anti-work movement, everyone, and most of you saw this Fox News interview. I have a poll that I put up there a few days ago. You can still participate in it and get your comments featured in the next video below. That's going to be an interesting one, guys, because I have a few, let's say, biases for anti-work. I'd say laziness and being a bludger is kind of probably a trigger for me, personally. But I think it's badly named. And I think some of the messaging they have, I think Fox went out of their way to pick a stereotype to make fun of. But I think some of their messages is, well, sensible. But we'll have a look at that one in the next episode, guys. Thank you all for watching. And if you want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can sign up for SelfWealth, where we will each get 5 free share trades. And thank you to everyone that does that, because it helps me with my pocket money investing. You can sign up for Stake, where we each get a free, one free share, guys, in the US market. They also have cheap ASX chess-sponsored shares. I think you can $3 a trade. I like them because I can buy partial holdings in shares when I'm building up a position. You can support us by buying our merch from HeiseSays. You can see the pocket squares there. I really should start wearing the suit again, but we're in a heat wave here in Queensland. You can support us by using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband. Thanks for watching, and check out this video about how people would be at the edge with just a $100 a month increase to their mortgage. It's more than you think. Take care, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode of Heise Says. Bye for now. I miss my old Stein.